for our chat.
And we are on. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to Spectrum Debate number 20. Whether you're watching us on YouTube, Google+, or on our website at spectrumdebates.com, you are very welcome. Tonight, we are going to be debating the general election. We're going to be looking at what we've all witnessed and seen and heard, and what we hope is going to happen, and what we think has happened, and what we think each of the parties is doing, and what the big issues are. So if there's something in particular you would like us to talk about, an incident, a policy, a person, a party, tweet us. And we'll do our best to fit that in during tonight's show. You'll be meeting our guests in a moment, but don't forget, as well as you giving us ideas for things to do with the election you'd like us to talk about, we also want you to send in your general questions, points, and challenges to our guests, and I'll do my best to put them all to them. Join in using the hashtag SD20. I'll do my best to put your questions to all of our guests and to let everyone else know what you are thinking. If you are watching on Google+, you can also use the Applause app, which tells us how much you agree or disagree with what any particular person is saying at any particular moment. And at 9 p.m. over on spectrumdebates.com, our post-show poll is launched asking who your favourite debater from tonight was. And to reveal that last week's winner, with an astonishing 40%, was me. Followed very, very closely, just 1% behind, by Liam Bones. So congratulations to Liam. And I did tweet earlier on some of the ways that people had actually voted for me. Personally, I'm not going to repeat them because some of them are quite nice. And I'm not here to big myself up. So without further ado, let's introduce you to each of our guests. And we begin with William Brown, who's broadcasting from Somerset. He is a Conservative, and he's going to tell you a little bit more about yourself. Good evening, William.
Hi, I'm William Brown. I live in Taunton Deane, and I'm currently standing to be a Conservative candidate for councillor at Wellington North ward in Taunton Deane.
Thank you very much indeed, William. Our next returnee is Lily Jane Summers, who is, I'm not sure whether she's broadcasting, I'm assuming from the Midlands tonight.
Not from the Midlands.
Ah, are we from South Wales tonight?
From South Wales tonight, Gary.
We're all down in that corner of the country so far. Good evening, how are you, Lily?
I'm absolutely fine, Gareth. I'm a Labour Party member. I'm from Stoke-on-Trent, and I like to advocate liberal socialism.
Thank you very much indeed. Another returnee is Joe Pattinson, who I think is broadcasting tonight. Last time you were broadcasting to us from Brussels. Tonight it's from York.
It is back home. I'm an advocate of liberal conservatism. I'm standing here in York as a candidate. So yeah, it's great to be back in the UK for a bit.
Thank you and welcome back to Bonnie Blighty. Our next guest is a new guest. It's Jack Hadfield. Good evening, Jack.
Hello.
How are you now? Well, tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm a sixth form student in the last year, sixth. I'm a right-wing conservative / libertarian who's quite Eurosceptic as well.
Thank you very much indeed. And our final returning guest is the irrepressible Harry Samuels, who is a fully fledged now Liberal Democrat. And we have seen those curtains before, I think. Good evening, Harry. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
So what's going on tonight? What's the kind of thing that you want to talk to us about tonight? I'm going to come to the others in a bit, but tell us, what do you think are some of the biggest moments we've seen of the general election so far?
This is not necessarily a popular view. I've just been down with my family for Easter Sunday, and they were talking about how boring and ineffectual they were. But the debates, I think, have been the marked moment of the campaign so far, and I think it would be interesting to discuss what we've taken from them, if anything, tonight.
Thank you very much. Was it boring? Interesting. What do you reckon, Jack? Were the debates boring? Did they add anything to the election?
I don't think they really added anything to the election in the way that that people's minds were changed. I think all it really did was reinforce party loyalties to whoever. You know, they really just agreed with whoever was speaking, and they didn't allow new ideas to. They didn't allow people's minds to change. Really, it wasn't really effective in that way.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Is that right? The debates, were they any use?
They're useful, but they're absolutely dull. There's nothing. There's no spar. There's no spies apart from Michael Farage pulling some funny faces at par. Miliband's having a stare off at the viewer and looking like he has a bogey in his hand all the time. But and Nick Clegg actually probably being the best debater, but without any knowledge of that acknowledgement.
Oh, fair enough. Lily, did Ed Miliband have a bogey in his hand? You need to answer this question for us tonight.
I don't think he did, Gary. I thought the debate was actually quite interesting, but like everyone else here, I don't think there was enough spark between all the other leaders. You know, I don't think there was this battle between them. They were just giving out all their regurgitating lines as normal. But I think first of all, Farage's comment on HIV sufferers was absolutely disgusting. I thought Clegg actually did pretty well. The polls said he didn't do very well, but I thought he was doing quite well. Nicola Sturgeon did very, very well. Cameron, I thought, was one of the worst because he, in my opinion, he couldn't really respond to the criticism. And the biggest problem, lastly, Gareth, is David Cameron isn't very good at responding to criticism. He's very, very good at delivering his attack lines, but whenever he's responded to, he's very, very ineffective, in my opinion.
Thank you. That's true, isn't it, William? For a Prime Minister with a 5-year history, he seems a little bit touchy on his own record.
He does, but I'm afraid to say he does try and deliver instead. But I think he does tend to defer it, I'm afraid, onto the problems they've had with the coalition, which sometimes have been evident. But but I think it's one of those things. I think he hasn't, because there's been the coalition, he hasn't learnt that. But I did personally find the debates quite dull. I found Twitter incredibly interesting that night. But the highlight for me probably hasn't been the debate at all. It's it has to be the level Twitter's been used in this campaign. Whole new battlegrounds have come out, which never existed last election.
Thank you very much indeed. Jack, you wanted to talk about something else on here, didn't you?
Yeah, well, Lily just mentioned Farage's comments on HIV. I wouldn't really say they were disgusting. I think he's had quite a valid point, and in a relatively recent poll I saw, I think 52% of all voters actually agreed with him. It wasn't the fact that, people are going to come here, they're going to spread HIV and so on. It was the fact that it was foreign citizens who are coming over here who didn't pay tax, and we paid for their HIV medicines for them. It's not to do with not considering them to be human beings, but rather that to do with the amounts of money that cost for such HIV drugs.
Thank you, Harry. That's right, isn't it? I mean, the majority of people agreed with what Farage said, and it is a huge drain on the NHS.
Two things. First of all, I think just on the general debates issue, I think the most important thing that came out of it was the emergence of people actually being conscious of what the SNP stand for. And although I don't necessarily agree with them, I think Nicola Sturgeon did pretty much spank her opposition. She was very impressive. On the HIV comment, are people still there? Because it doesn't look like anything's moving.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. On the HIV comment, first of all, the majority of the public agreeing doesn't matter. That doesn't make it right or wrong. It's not a huge drain on the NHS, and personally, I think that if you have somebody, let's make it clear first of all, Britain is a world leader in HIV research, and if you have HIV, you can, with the drugs that we have and the healthcare we have, lead a pretty normal life and a pretty normal length life. How can we say that we are willing to deny that treatment to people suffering from HIV? How can we say that? And second of all, it was not just that Farage was saying. By saying it in the way he did, that whatever percentage it was of new HIV diagnoses were foreign, he was, and I think people have missed this, I think he was very subtly trying to say that the majority of HIV in this country and the sources of HIV in this country are foreigners. And I think people have missed that because I think people trying to think Farage is a good person, but I think that was a purposeful point that he was trying to make, and I think it's disgusting that he tried to make that. I'm not advocating full health tourism, but I'm saying, well, we're clear world leaders in a chronic illness which can be devastating if it's not treated properly. I think we should absolutely be compassionate towards these people and help them, because that's what healthcare is for. We can't deny it to these people.
Thank you very much, Harry. A few of the comments that you have made at home so far. One thing, says Chris Brown at C. Brown Archer, from the debates, we learned that the presenter couldn't handle the party leaders. Where are we? Yes, he also adds that Clegg did quite well. However, Miliband has shown that he's in the SNP's pocket. On the particular issue of HIV, James at Galasite says, fair enough, it is a problem, HIV migrants, but why focus on that tiny problem when there are so many bigger ones? Chris Brown adds, Farage could have easily just chosen a disease not as well associated with one community rather than being disgusting. On that one, at Blue Liberal 1 says Nigel was just doing a token single-issue obsessed drunken pub bore act, but that's what his fans like. Chris G. For Cameron, the debates were mission accomplished. Miliband didn't lay a glove on him. Farage became his boo boy. He also says, quote, his favourite quote from the debates was, I'm willing to defend all the decisions we both took around the cabinet table. And that was from Cameron to Clegg. Alex Ward, the debates were great. I got a bit drunk watching them. I think a lot of people probably got drunk after it, thinking this is what we're having to decide on. And I'll come back to some of the others in a moment. William.
Well, I'd first like to agree with. I did think Cameron was did get his points across as far as he showed that by him trying to stand back and let things and let his statements as far as Clegg was concerned stand. But as far as what Harry was saying with Farage, it was obviously trying to pick on frankly outdated associations with HIV. It was frankly it was beneath Farage, to be honest. I know Farage can stoop sometimes, but it didn't need saying. And yes, to an extent, I agree that health tourism to a certain extent might need regulating, so you can almost encourage HIV people to come over, but in a regulated way, and in a way that we're not paying for all of it. But the idea that people need to pay through the nose if they're absolutely desperate is fundamentally wrong. Especially when I think we are the number one. We're not. I think we eclipsed America about 3 years ago. I seem to remember. But yeah, and there's so many other cases. TB is such an important one as well. TB, we handle far more TB sufferers than HIV, and that doesn't get talked about because, frankly, for Farage's voters, you still have a lot of people who associate HIV with the gay community, and they still don't like the gay community. And I'm afraid to say that's.
Yeah. There are a few people who would agree with your point on that, who've commented on it so far. Salman Anwar points out that he also manages to link that with, that, and everything he said was linked with immigration, and he managed to do it rather poorly. And he knew what he was doing because of the stereotype and it's being linked to the LGBT community. He was securing his weird base. Where are we? And I always find some excellent points that you all tweet, and then they vanish from my screen as I'm scrolling through. Chris Latimer, 632 at Chris J. Latimer. Nick Clegg had a great debate, but because he's Nick Clegg, no one was listening. Sturgeon was just tremendous, though, an easy winner. At Stratohuvius, Farage's HIV comments appeal directly to his middle-aged voter base who lived through the scares of the 80s, I think. Is this fair criticism, Jack? Because he could have chosen TB, couldn't he? Some of our commentators have said, but TB doesn't affect a particular group that UKIP have already been accused of demonising.
Well, I think that could be a valid point, but also the fact that he did have to use one example for health tourism, and given that HIV is such a controversial and taboo disease, that leads to sort of allowing him to use a shock and awe tactic. Some of these things, this has sparked comments between lots of different people. So now, we're obviously talking about Nigel Farage, and it may have been wrong to sort of subtly say that, blame it on the LGBT community. But that was, we are now talking about Nigel Farage. So I don't think his tactics were wrong in that way.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to ask you to close this little part of the discussion, Harry, in a moment. But I wondered if Joe or Lily want to add anything first.
Well, one brief point I would make, Gareth, is that apparently Nigel Farage was actually going to use tuberculosis, but they looked into the figures of how much it cost people with tuberculosis, treating people with HIV, and they saw that HIV, I think, costs about £25,000 for viral or over the cost a certain amount of time. So he went for HIV solely because it costed more. So he was actually going to go for tuberculosis, but he didn't for various reasons.
Was that reason purely cost, though, Lily? Wasn't he doing it because, UKIP have attracted a certain kind of person over their opposition to equal marriage, and this kind of thing was this not a nod and a wink to those people saying, we might have lost that debate, but hey, here we are having a go at those gays again?
I just think it was generally a stupid comment. Apparently, people in the UKIP office were actually shocked at what Nigel Farage actually said on HIV. It was just a generally stupid comment. I think Nigel Farage wanted to use shock and awe tactics, and quite frankly, it backfired on him.
Thank you very much, Joe.
I thought he was lapping up the voter base that he has, and I thought it was particularly disgusting to stigmatise a certain part of the population and of the world to use it to his advantage, which of course is politics, but it's just particularly disgusting and despicable use of the English language and our people and the NHS, and how it shouldn't even go there.
Thank you. Harry, close this part.
Well, I find it really difficult because Jack said the comment. He may have used it to target the LGBT community, but and I cannot condone or caution or support or even think that is ever acceptable to say, well, he did target the LGBT community, but that's not okay. That is never okay. And it doesn't matter if we're talking about Farage. I refuse to think about this in terms of political calculation because it is not. It is just disgusting. And Farage did clearly calculate usage of HIV, and that is disgusting. And so, yes, I do. The thing that I've taken from this debate is that it has reinforced my opinion of UKIP as absolutely disgusting, and it has reinforced my resolve to campaign against them in whatever way I can. And I think that is the main thing that has come out of this debate for me personally. I think the thing that has come out of the debate for the majority of people is that this election is going to be one of the most confusing elections and the most undecided and uncertain elections that we've ever had. Just a very brief anecdote, I was door knocking yesterday, and I've never heard so many people say they didn't know how they were going to vote in an election. So I think that's what the message is going to be. I don't think there are going to be any breakthrough moments for the parties. I'm pretty sure that the polls are going to be neck and neck right up to polling day, and God knows what will happen after that. But I'll be drinking and watching BBC election coverage, so there we are.
Perhaps, Harry, people were saying to you that they didn't know how they were going to vote because they didn't want to say to such a well-turned-out, polite young man, there's no way on earth I'm voting Lib Dem.
That's perfectly possible, but all I'd say is that I sort of normally tell the difference between them sort of lingeringly saying I don't know how to vote to just avoid offending me, and people saying I genuinely have no idea. And there are a number of people who asked me to explain certain policies and the points of contention, so I do think it is genuinely more uncertain. But I am sure that there were people who just wanted me to leave them alone on a Saturday afternoon. That's perfectly fine.
Thank you. Jack, just one final thing there. I believe you have something that a UKIP member said about this particular issue.
Yeah, a very, very close friend of mine is a member of UKIP, and she actually said that she didn't like what Farage had said just because because she did disagree with the shock and awe tactic, and she felt that it did actually make UKIP seem like quite a horrible party. That was from an actual UKIP member. So I wanted to quickly mention that before the end.
Lovely, thank you very much. Now I'm just going to extend this now because on Twitter so far we've had a lot of very positive comments about Leanne Wood and Nicola Sturgeon. Someone's been commenting that Nicola Sturgeon got away with a lot because no one was really interested in challenging her. We've had other people talking about the next debate, the oppositioners, the challengers debate, which will feature Ed Miliband, Leanne Wood, Nicola Sturgeon, Nigel Farage. Is there anyone else, or have I missed some? Oh, Natalie Bennett. And their belief that obviously they'll possibly gang up on Ed Miliband. Now, is this true? What I would like to know what your views are, panel, about the issue of Wales and Scotland, because it's probably the first time most people in England have had any airtime with Leanne Wood of Plaid Cymru and Nicola Sturgeon of the SNP. What was your take on it? What do you think the effect might be of what people in England saw there? Lily, I wonder, because of course I'll come to you if I may, because it's Labour who perhaps have the most to lose from Plaid Cymru and the SNP gaining in popularity.
Well, Plaid's not going to gain much popularity. In my opinion, Leanne Wood was useless in the debate. I don't know why you're praising her, Gareth. In terms of Scotland, we have. I would say we've got the most to win because we're so behind. But I think the problem with Ed Miliband is you just said this a moment ago, Gareth, that he didn't really challenge Nicola Sturgeon's policies enough. It seemed like Nicola Sturgeon was actually doing most of the attacking. And so if I was Ed Miliband, I would look at all the SNP policies and try to find every single way to criticise the SNP and to not go the way of lies and scaremongering from the Daily Telegraph.
Doesn't that memo actually exist though?
Well, it's a bit confusing though, Gareth, because apparently it was denied by the French ambassador, but when they were directly asked, like, did this actually happen? It was like, no, I don't want to talk about it. So either the Daily Telegraph is completely lied, or it's completely true. And quite frankly, I would probably say that the Daily Telegraph probably used sources that were, in private conversation. It probably wasn't true.
Okay, thank you.
By the way, I wouldn't want the attack to be based on that. I think we can do a lot better than that.
Okay. William, I'm going to come to you next, if I may, because what impact do you think that the results from Scotland? First of all, what do you think is going to happen in Scotland and Wales at the general election, and how's that going to impact on the next Parliament?
I'm afraid to say I do believe that the SNP are going to gain an awful lot of seats, and that and although that should make the Conservatives stronger in the next Parliament, it makes me fundamentally worried as a unionist about the future of Scotland. There's so many useful Lib Dems, and I don't think I like saying that sentence, especially in the southwest, in Scotland. And I get terrified the idea of them being taken over by the SNP, especially in the Highlands, which have been staunch Lib Dems forever since they were the Whigs. And that is quite terrifying. I'd like to talk about Wales, if you don't mind. I did quite enjoy Leanne Wood. I've living in Aberystwyth for my degree for the last 3 years. I finished last year. I heard stuff from the Welsh Assembly quite often, and she probably didn't make too much effect on voters in England because she was so Welsh-centric. But what she has done is, say on a national stage, that she kept talking about Wales all the time, whereas Nicola Sturgeon was trying to be national in her approach, challenging Labour on a national platform, and almost answering the questions about Miliband being in the SNP's pocket, about how they could be national as well. Leanne Wood was very, very focused on Plaid's interest in Wales, and I think that might play into her hands as far as the next election is concerned. in the Labour areas that have become fed up with Labour and national politics.
Thank you very much. A few of the comments that we've had so far on this particular area. Lynn Patterson at Nosrepat. A huge underestimation by the London-centric establishment, its complacency or incompetence. Hashtag SNP landslide. Chris Brown at C. Brown Archer. Woody did so well because she completely dismissed Miliband when he tried to be important. Daniel at Daniel Who says Wales won't impact the result so much, but Scotland will impact it a lot. Chris Brown, Ed also seems to be scared of the SNP ever since the attempt at independence. Where are we? Yes, Gavin at Blue Liberal 1. Most to win, Lily? You mean lose an awful lot rather than a hell of an awful lot. Chris G, however, agrees with you, Lily. Being attacked by Leanne Wood, the leader of the Fourth Party of Wales, is like being savaged by a dead sheep. So, yes, he's certainly agreeing with you on that one. Eric Galinsky, at A. Galinsky, says, sorry, Lily, but you've got no idea what you're talking about. The memo exists, but it relays third-hand events of the meeting. Chris G, Miliband has to choose whether to say he's truly left-wing to win back Scots in that opposition debate, or pretends that he's fiscally responsible. And of course, Daniel's pointing out here. We've had some comments that people are suggesting here for other things that we can talk about. So we'll come back to those in just a moment. Joe.
Well, I thought Leanne Wood was lovely and dulcet with her Welsh tones, but I thought she was utterly hopeless with the argument against Ed Miliband on the NHS in particular. That's probably the strongest argument case in Wales for Wales. And I thought Leanne Wood could have gone in there with a bit more verve, a bit more bite, and got onto it there from a Tory perspective like yourself. Especially where to do absolutely shockingly appalling with the NHS in Wales. So yeah, that's my view.
Thank you very much indeed. Jack.
Well, in terms of Scotland, I'm rather conflicted about the SNP winning because I'm 100% sure that they'll wipe out Labour in Scotland. Sorry, Lily, but yeah, because in the end, they do then strike out Labour in Scotland, but they then shift the whole country towards the left. Which, as someone who's relatively right-wing economically, if you run by the Scots, who, in my opinion, are completely fiscally irresponsible, it would be a total nightmare. With that whole, if Ed Miliband, was in the pocket of Alex Salmond, if he does become an MP in Westminster, that does terrify me. Even if the Conservatives or UKIP would get a blowback from this and win more seats in the long run, I think even just in the next 5 years, it would just be absolutely awful.
Thank you very much indeed. Harry, Wales and Scotland, what impact is it going to have?
I think, first of all, you have to sort of have a look at traditional sort of fervency for independence. I think Scotland definitely has more of a national spirit than Wales, and I think Wales has more of a national spirit than Cornwall, for example, which is why Mebion Kerno is not a factor in the elections down here. Plaid Cymru is a little bit in Wales, the SNP is massively in Scotland. So I don't think Plaid Cymru is going to do any better particularly when it's a squeeze between Labour and the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats even, who still are sort of relatively big forces in Wales. In Scotland, I do think Labour's going to lose a lot. I think the Liberal Democrats will lose a lot. I'm particularly sad because I think the Liberal Democrats might lose Danny Alexander and Charles Kennedy, who are both excellent MPs. But I have to say I think the impact might be most significant on England. Because if you listen to the debate, Natalie Bennett, even though she wasn't very good in herself, her strategy was actually very clever, because she was basically constantly saying, I agree with Nicola, I agree with Leanne. So I think she was trying to appeal to the English left-wing voters who wanted a Nicola Sturgeon to vote for, but don't have one. And I'll be interested to see how much that is affected. I have to say I don't think it'll be much. but I think there could be a few seats where the Green vote is just high enough, 6 or 7%, that it could rob Labour of a few seats and hand them to, I have to say, mostly the Conservatives, which would be an interesting situation. But it's those little
performance, though. Is it merely a way of her avoiding the rather embarrassing one she had on the day of their manifesto launch? You know, if she essentially just had to say, "I agree with Leanne, I agree with Nicola." I mean, expectations of her were so low on that debate. All she had to do was turn up and not soil herself, and she was going to be seen as having done well, surely.
I have to say, I think maybe to us that's the impression, but I think to the voter who watched, I don't think they'd been aware of the Daily Politics interview. I don't think they'd have been aware of that manifesto launch. And I think for a disgruntled left-wing voter in Northern Heartlands, for example, I just think that they might see Natalie Bennett and think they represent me better, as Nicola Sturgeon would, but I can't vote for her, so I'll vote for Natalie Bennett instead. As I say, it's going to be marginal, but those 6 or 7 seats where it might have an impact could decide the election. That's how close it is.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to come to Jack and then Joe in a moment. Robert Tyler at RG Tyler is pointing out that the SNP, Plaid Cymru and the English Green Party have a pact with each other. You've seen this progressive alliance that they have been talking about all over the place, and that is rather reflected in the way in which, as you described, Harry, the three of them had a particular pronged attack in the leaders' debate. Chris G is pointing out here that Miliband will risk losing one debate and resist the urge from his Scottish candidates to talk of anti-austerity. There's no point winning a debate and losing the general election. Jack.
Yeah, one reason why the SNP are going to make such huge gains in Scotland now is because the independence referendum is now over. It's finished. And so the people who were worried about, voting for the SNP because then Scotland would split and so on, they're now going to think, referendum's, done and over, so why don't we vote for the SNP because they're now more left-wing than Labour. That's why you're going to get some people who aren't exactly pro-independence voting for the SNP and thus increasing their votes in this general election.
Thank you very much. A couple of points on what have been said there, then I'll come to Joe. We've got Chris at All Riff No Raff. Sturgeon offered a hand of friendship to England, but her austerity, anti-austerity, anti-union and anti-Tory policies are not very welcome here. Salman Anwar points out that Bennett talks about climate change, and he knows that they're Greens, but he thinks that was probably a mistake. At Stradihuvius, while I can see it now, I personally missed Bennett agreeing with Sturgeon and the implications, so I'm unsure how effective it was. Salman Anwar says everyone was aware of the LBC interview. It was on the Loop on the news. John Hudson at Les Fox, Salman says she talked about climate change but not about environmental destruction. So she was actually pretty weak on that score. Joe?
Yeah, I if we're going to mention Scotland, let's mention David Coburn. Big shout out to him, of course, for his comedy club. But more to the issue, I think the lapping. I think like UKIP, the SNP are certainly lapping up to the nationalists, like UKIP, and looking out for the scapegoat sort of thing. Something's got to be the blame, like everything is. But so the SNP is Westminster. Like the UKIP is the EU or immigrants or probably the gays. But that's what my opinion is, and I think Sturgeon could have been a bit more brutal as well.
Okay, now does anybody here think that the SNP isn't going to win a large number of seats off Labour in Scotland?
I think it'll be closer than people are saying it is at the moment.
Okay, so you don't believe in the wipeout theory?
No.
I don't think they'll win sort of 45, 40 seats. I think when it comes to people standing in the ballot box, there will be people who have sort of fear, sort of cold feet about voting for them.
Yeah.
And I think that'll be the crucial factor.
I don't think the SNP are going to get 45, 50%.
I think there's Labour are going to hang on a bit, but Lib Dems, apart from Shetland and Orkney, are pretty much going to get wiped out, I think, personally.
Probably 15 seats max.
15 seats, says Joe.
Wow. 15
Anyone else want to come up with a number?
35.
Yeah,
Jack says 35.
35, 30.
40.
35, 40. So, okay, all right.
Yeah, 40.
Now,
That increase.
people have generally said that Plaid Cymru are unlikely to make too much of an impact. How about the other big challenger, as it were, being UKIP? What do we think of their particular... we've talked a lot about Nigel Farage, but in particular in terms of how many seats they'll win, where do we think we should be looking
3.
out for?
Well,
I think
Harry says 3. Why 3?
I think Reckless will lose Rochester and Stroud.
Yeah.
Carl will hold Clacton. Farage, for all of the stuff in the papers today, I think Farage will win South Thanet, and I think Tim Aker will win Thurrock. So, 3.
Okay, fair enough. Jack, UKIP, how are they going to do?
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest electoral impact will not be on how many seats they win, but on how many seats they make the Conservatives lose. I mean, I've seen some stats recently from the marginals, and it was where in Conservative Labour marginals, and where UKIP had eaten into the Conservative vote, so it might just push Labour over to the end in those crucial seats, which I think is the real danger. So it has been what the Tories have been saying, that if you do vote UKIP, you'll end up in bed with Miliband, just because of how our electoral system works.
I'm particularly worried about the same thing happening with in seats where it's a contest between Conservatives and the Dems, as it is in most of the Southwest. I think the UKIP is going to erode into that, and also I think they're going to win more than 3. I think they're going to have 5 next election. I think they're going to take Ceredigion on. I've got a feeling, and I think they're going to have 5. I agree with Harry's judgment on the 3, but the other one I think they're going to win. I think they're going to win one in the West Midlands somewhere.
Okay, our audience so far, a few predictions that people are making here. We've got Chris G. Chris G points out in terms of the role of Nicola Sturgeon, she says she could tease Miliband in the opposition debate. If the Tories don't get an overall majority, let us form an anti-Tory government. Miliband will say no. That's Chris's prediction. Salman Anwar thinks the SNP are likely to get near 40 seats. They're not like any other party. They feel more like a positive movement. Robert Tyler, Carswell holds, Farage might gain, and that's on a high turnout. Low turnout, he thinks, however, it might win up to 7 seats. That's UKIP. Chris Brown at C. Brown Archer, UKIP 13% of seats. Jill J. Green at Jill Rocks, to Jill. That woman is another Thatcher, you'll see later. Actually, I'm not sure. Oh, that's in relation to Nicola Sturgeon, apparently. She's another Margaret Thatcher. And I have to say, Chris, someone tweet Chris Latimer and tell him it's rude because he's tweeting without actually watching us. So there's no point in me being rude about you here, Chris, because you can't watch. So that's a bit of a shame. Right, so if we've got this fragmenting situation across the UK, in fact, no, before we come to that, let's think about the Lib Dems, because the Lib Dems, of course, won 54 seats at the last election. And this was despite their votes dropping ever so slightly, but they were still in the early 20s. What is going to happen to the Lib Dems? Are they still going to be a force of note in the next Parliament?
I think the Lib Dems will play a crucial role, especially for the Tories, because we are the most favourable for them, and we don't really want their vote or seat numbers to go down, because we want to form it. Because in the likelihood of forming a next government, it looks like it's going to be another hung parliament, and for a coalition majority, the Lib Dems are, for the Tories, probably the hope to linger on.
Because there isn't, I mean, there really isn't likely to be, is there, any sort of, William, any substantial group of MPs other than the Liberal Democrats that a Conservative minority or Conservative coalition could be formed around, is there?
Yeah, the only other one really is ones we don't really like, which is we like the idea of, is the UUP, and there's UKIP, and we really do prefer the Lib Dems over both of those, really, because they're far closer to our centrist views than the fringes.
Fair enough. Lily, you wanted to say something, and
I think in terms of the next election, the Lib Dems could form the government with either side. I mean, in terms of the Tories, if the Tories do pretty well, some polls are predicting, the Tories can get 35, 36, even 37, retain about 300 seats, then the Lib Dems could keep Cameron in power. Not necessarily, they don't even have to do a full-blown coalition like before. But they could also do one thing that could actually happen is you could do a coalition between Labour and the Liberal Democrats and then have a supply deal with the SNP. So the Lib Dems could put Miliband in power, especially if Nick Clegg loses his seat. But I think with the Liberal Democrats, they've got a lot of position to go in. They can either go with Labour this time or go with the Tories again. So in many ways, the Lib Dems could be not necessarily kingmakers like before, but they could hold a substantial amount of power to whoever will become the next Prime Minister.
Thank you. Jack?
Yeah, well, I don't think that the Lib Dems will get wiped out as so many people say they will, because even though their national vote share may drop significantly, I think they'll still stay strong in those seats which have always been Lib Dem, and that's where the real power base is. Because they have such a spread out support across the country, they have relatively rare areas where Lib Dem support is concentrated, and I think that support will actually still stay rather strong. So I think they'll lose their seats in Scotland, possibly Nick Clegg's because of the student vote, Sheffield Hallam. But I don't think they'll lose that many, and I think they will be rather significant in the next government.
Where would you say the safe seats are for Lib Dems? Because a lot of the ones outside in Scotland actually was considered marginals at the last election.
I couldn't give any specifics. I think it was more generally talking about. I haven't seen that many stats on them recently, but I think they still will remain that strong.
Well, one of their strongholds is generally considered the southwest, and I think this election there's only one of the Lib Dem seats in the southwest, or is it two, that aren't 40-40 seats for the Tories. So.
Well, what I'll do is I'm going to ask Harry to answer that one, if I may. But just a couple of predictions people have given us so far. Robert Tyler at RG Tyler, the Lib Dems will go down to 25 seats. They'll be able to hold on. Remember, they've collapsed before and they can bounce back. And in terms of a future coalition with the Lib Dems, it depends who survives. If it's Farron and Cable, it's more likely to go to Labour. If Clegg survives, it's more likely to go to the Conservatives. Chris G says that the Lib Dems will beat the UKIP share of the vote, but they will lose half of their seats. Clegg will resign, and they won't dare go into a coalition at all. Salman Anwar thinks the Lib Dems will have 30 to 35 seats because they're well dug in. Robert Winfield hope that the Conservatives win a majority so that no coalition with the Lib Dems is required. Harry, do the Lib Dems have any safe seats left?
Well, first of all, I would just like to say how devastated I am that certain Lib Dems are stepping down. In particular, Jeremy Brown in Taunton Deane. I would cut off my nipple just to see him stand again at the next election. I really like Jeremy Brown.
Now you heard it here first, Jeremy. If a cut-off nipple from an Oxford student will persuade you to stand for re-election, please do get in touch with Harry. He lives in Cornwall, and as far as we're aware, Cornish nipples are highly prized. Do continue.
Highly sought after. Anyway, I think that the problem with the Liberal Democrats is that for so long they've just been a protest party. They haven't gone out and found a base. And a point that somebody raised earlier is we have bounced back several times. I mean, in the 50s and 60s we had 8, 11 seats. So whatever, we will come back. I think it's going to be less bleak. I think when it comes down to it, especially in Liberal Democrat Conservative marginals, I think people will, on the squeeze vote, vote for the Liberal Democrats. I think there are 3 maybe seats that we could actually take from the Conservatives. South East Cornwall, Oxford, Western Abingdon and Watford. But I think I have to say, if I were to put a number on it, I would say that the Liberal Democrats, on a bad day, down to 25, on a good day, 32, 33. but I don't think we have any safe seats.
Okay, but you think that there could be 3 gains for the Liberal Democrats, although not net gains, but they might actually gain up to 3 seats.
Oxford West and Abingdon has a majority for the Conservatives of about 130, and it's something tiny like that. It's the 9th most marginal seat, and that again is that squeeze vote. People won't want the Conservatives, so they'll vote Lib Dem to beat them. In Watford, a very popular directly elected mayor is standing, and in South East Cornwall, again, it's another one of those small majorities, traditional Liberal areas, where if enough people turn out, the personal vote for the Conservative could go down and the squeeze vote could go up for the Liberal Democrats. So those are the 3 sort of, I think, ones to watch. They'll be interesting. But I think the safest seats for the Lib Dems are probably places like Cambridge, which Julian Huppert looks to remain in, and a couple of others in the sort of West Midlands. But I honestly don't really know what's going to happen. It depends on turnout, I think.
Thank you very much. A couple more predictions people have made, then I'm going to come to Joe. Dylan Morris, former guest of ours. Hello, Dylan. Dylan HM. He says that UKIP will win 3, the Lib Dems 29, and the SNP 50. Chris Brown, Lib Dem safe seats, let me think. None that I can think of. Robert Winfield, he says the Lib Dems broke the coalition agreement in relation to boundary changes. Can they even be trusted to be effective coalition partners in future? Parley Me and Tory is a little bit wary of Salman Anwar's suggestion that the Lib Dems will hold 30 to 35 seats. Leon French, hello Leon, it's nice to have you back in, and we're looking forward to your comments. And SD the Gossip at S_debate_news is now talking about the Great Cornish Nipple scandal of 2015. So that's all still to come. Matt Jack Green 98 points out a poll from Lord Ashcroft saying that the Conservatives will hold Oxford West and Abingdon. Joe.
I'd like to add on to it's quite a shame to see classical Liberals like Jeremy Brown leaving the Parliament, but I won't be cutting off any parts of my body for him to return. But and UKIP 1 seat only, and with the Lib Dems, I think there might be the exacerbation of them in the southwest, in particularly to Cornwall and Devon. And also Scotland, but the traditional sort of places like Cheltenham, the Cheltenhams, the Cambridges, the Edinburghs, they are classical Liberal rather than the Social Democrat. That's probably the trend of safe Lib Dem seats.
Thank you very much, Joe. Anyone else got any comments on the Lib Dems in particular before we move on to the next issue?
A very quick anecdote that a candidate down here was telling me the other day. He was talking to a voter on the doorstep a few weeks ago, and she said, "I'm not voting for you ever since you got into bed with that lot." And he said, "Well, the Conservatives, we had to go into do compromise with them." And she said, "Not the Conservatives, the bloody STP." So that sort of shows the Liberal tradition down in Cornwall.
Fair enough. Thank you very much indeed. Over at SpectrumDebates.com right now, the post-show poll is launched, where you can vote for your favourite debater from tonight. So do go on and have a look. Our highest number of votes so far was over 600. We didn't quite get to that last week, but we weren't that far off. So let's see if we can make it another record breaker. My next question to the panel is actually about electoral systems. This was suggested by Daniel on Twitter. With this talk of fracturing politics and, the Lib Dems, for example, their support collapsing, but their number of seats not vanishing in the same way, the SNP gaining, and Plaid Cymru and UKIP perhaps not getting the right number of seats related to their share of the vote. Is it time, really? I mean, is first past the post now essentially dead for the UK?
No.
Why not?
No, of course not. Well, this is okay. I would say this is one of the firm establishment parties I like first past the post, but I personally believe that the era of majority government isn't over. It's going through a blip. If you look at some of the evidence of how people are interested in this election, yes, how disinterested people have got with national politics over the last few years, there's a prediction I quite like that says that we might go back up to 70% voter turnout in this election. guess it's quite positive and quite optimistic, but
Well,
I think there's a chance that in 10 years' time, 2 elections' time, we'll be looking at the idea that there wouldn't be majority governments in the future as balmy. I think people are getting far more politically savvy due to the splintering, and I think people are going to decide what they want. There might be some tough elections ahead, but I think we will get back to it.
Right, Jack, is William right? Is the electoral system broken?
Well, there certainly are some positive aspects of FPTP. I mean, such as given the strong majority government, which has a mandate from the electorate. But I'd like to see move to the single transferable vote, just because I don't think that this splinter is a blip. I think as people become politically aware, as William said, I think the different views that people have held, they realise, oh, well, actually, I'm more aligned with this party, with this party, with this party, rather than just Conservatives or Labour as it's always been. I am a strong Conservative, but I actually see this as being beneficial for the two main parties in a way. For example, with UKIP, in those Conservative Labour marginals, which I talked about earlier, if you did have such a single transferable vote, if someone had put UKIP first, then Conservative second, the UKIP would drop out, and then those votes would go towards the Conservatives. And so, in the end, it would actually, make a government and a parliament that more people have voted for, and and actually reflected the general view of the country. So.
Thank you, Lily. Is it time to change the electoral system?
Yes, 100%. I would be hugely in favour of SDP. I would introduce that. I would introduce a new electoral system, Gareth, just to make sure that we no longer have a vote for UKIP, a vote for Labour, a vote for the SNP, which is a vote for Tory. It's just so pathetic to have campaign tactics to say that a vote for a party is a vote for another party. You should vote for a party because you want that party's candidate to be your new MP. So I think the party's campaign method on a vote for so-and-so is a vote for so-and-so is completely pathetic. So I think we should introduce a new electoral system. I think it's finally time after such a long period.
Okay, well, Chris G makes the point that actually first past the post isn't dead. There was a referendum in 2011, fought as much on first past the post as it was on AV, and the public voted overwhelmingly for first past the post.
I wouldn't.
Go on, Lily.
I would say they actually rejected AV rather than necessarily in favour of support of first past the post. I don't think there was enough information on the benefits of changing the electoral system. If we have a referendum on SDB or another form of proportional representation, I bet you with an actual campaign that has the Labour Party fully behind it, the Liberal Democrats fully behind it, and all progressive parties fully behind changing the electoral system, I bet you that they would vote to change the electoral system.
Thank you very much. Okay, more of the comments, then I'll come to Joe. Leon French, I don't think people in Britain actually like parties compromising on policies. They don't like parties ditching policies to make coalitions. Salman Anwar would like us to move on to something a bit more interesting than this, but we will do very shortly. Robert Winfield agrees with you, William. He agrees that majority government is going through a blip. Robert Tyler, we should go for the additional member system, vote for parties and get seat allocated by the percentage of the vote parties get, which obviously you would in the top-up member part of the election. Gordon McCaskill says that no, quite simply, no. First past the post, it's fine. The electoral system is not broken. Joe?
I've always pondered on having a directly elected executive. And also
that's a bit big for tonight, don't you think?
Oh, is it?
Gosh.
But you still keep the constitutional monarchy form as well, because in that way, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
It's broke.
It's not
Well,
broke.
if the executive is the monarchy, I completely agree with that idea. But
we still
That's what we call traditionalism.
yeah,
we just directly elect the person you want as an MP, rather than if you want somebody as an MP, then you can directly elect somebody you want as the PM instead. Like,
Well, they tried that in Israel for a couple of elections, didn't they? Because there they had, obviously, because of the electoral system to the Knesset, a very fractured parliament with lots of small parties gaining a few percent of the vote. In fact, I think the threshold originally was 1.5%. So they started directly electing the prime minister, and they found that made pretty much no difference whatsoever, except you had another round of very expensive elections. But let's see if anyone else agrees with that and has anything else on electoral reform.
But
And
can I
whether
just
it's
add on
broken
a
before we
bit
move
of
on?
it?
Go on.
I do.
but it's just we just have it at the same time as the MPs, so it's not really.
Okay.
No, it's
Harry.
First of all, this people supported first past the post. No, they didn't. The referendum question was asking whether we should change to AV. It's either a positive change or a rejection of that change, and a rejection of a change is not an endorsement of the original position. I think also the fact that in the referendum campaign we had first past the post, one of the merits was we get strong, clear government all the time. Well, look at the last election and look at this election and potentially look at the next election and the next election. And that's a
Don't
bit of
wish
a lie,
more
really.
general elections on us than this current one, Harry.
This is the point is that if it doesn't do what it says on the tin and it's unfair in addition to that, why on earth are we keeping it? You know, we need an electoral system, because I think there'll be situations in this election where, say, UKIP will get 12% of the vote and 4 seats, whereas the Liberal Democrats will get 8% of the votes and 30 seats, and the Greens will get 8% of the vote and 1 seat, where we'll ask, why have we got these disparities in voting numbers and MPs and seats in the House of Commons? It needs to change. We need a reflective system. Sorry?
Okay.
Blocked out boundary changes, that's why.
I didn't personally. I
was meaning the party, sorry.
But I'm not an MP. I wouldn't have. I would have voted for the boundary changes because I agree that they should be as least gerrymandered as possible. That I have to say that was in retaliation for the blocking of House of Lords reform. But on the principle of it, boundary changes and Lords reform and voting reform are all needed, because otherwise we have this horrible situation where people's votes don't count, and we have this vote SNP and get Labour and get UKIP, vote UKIP to get the SNP or whatever. We get this rubbish. We need to get rid of it, and we need to make elections sort of on principle again, and that's what STV or A+ would do.
Okay.
Can I just pick up on Joe's point? Just.
In a moment, I'll just give some comments, then you can make that final one before we move on to the next issue. Chris G points out, well, under PR, a vote for the Greens would still be a vote for Labour because they're hardly likely to go into coalition with the Tories. Stradihuvius, Lily is absolutely right. Whether the electoral system changes or not, tactical voting, etc., is awful and needs to end. Robert Winfield, STV is the best proportional system, but I would still retain first past the post. Chris G adds, the public wasn't bright enough to understand the arguments around first past the post, so let's change voting procedures for referendums. He's asking that question. David Jeffrey echoes that. He's saying, is the point really that the public is stupid and therefore we should complicate the electoral system? Robert Winfield, the additional member system offers too much power to party machines. Leon French, Harry's telling people how they voted. David Jeffrey says, no, Harry's argument is that first past the post makes coalitions less likely, doesn't guarantee majority government.
They're the same thing.
Okay. Jack, final comment before we move on.
Just on Joe's idea about the directly elected executive, you just have to look at America and see the split government and all the problems that they have with that. So, it's all right idea in principle, but, then you do have the whole split system.
I did say ponder, not force it.
Well, we're nothing if we're not about thinking about stuff here.
Very, very final point, Gareth. Lots of people are saying, oh, let's disregard the result of the referendum, say the progressives on the panel, i.e. public too stupid to understand. No, that's not what I'm saying. We're saying that is not... The question wasn't, do you support first past the post? The question was, do you support AV? You could not support AV and not support first past the post. This might blow people's minds, but it's a false dichotomy. You can support one out of several systems and neither of them be the question that's asked.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Right, our next topic, I think perhaps the final big thing we'll talk about, is what do you think will be the big issues people will finally vote on when they go into that polling booth on the 7th of May, what's going to be the deciding factor, particularly for undecided or swing voters? What is going to make them finally decide which box to put their cross in? So what do you at home think? What is going to be the big issue, the big event, what is it that's going to make people decide? Anyone on the panel got any ideas or views on this?
Yeah, well, I have one. I think I genuinely think that immigration is going to be quite a big issue. I mean, I've done some phone calling for the Conservatives, asking, and one of them was, out of these three issues of of whatever really you could think of, one of them that almost always came up was immigration. I think that whatever a party stance is and whatever you think about it, I think it's just such a divisive topic that a lot of people may form their opinions around it.
I think it's going to have to be the economy.
Yes, William?
I think it's going to have to be the economy. I've talked to Labour voters and Lib Dem voters who both have such strong opinions that the economy is the most important factor, and that their parties aren't discussing enough options to do with the economy, that they are going to vote Tory. But I don't know, there'll be people doing exactly the same the other way around. But I think the economy is the most important issue, and I'm afraid to say, I know it's never going to happen, but at the moment, every single one of us could have a bill arrive with asking for £25,000 each, because that's how much in debt we are. That's not the deficit, that's the debt. Like 25 grand, have you got it lying about? If any of you have, pay off your bit of the national debt, please. It'd be lovely. But that's what it currently stands at, and to me that's incredibly scary. I'd love to pay for everything. If in my ideal world, I'd have so much things paid by for the government. No one would have to. If anyone was in trouble, it would be sorted. But we can't. Within reason.
You sound virtually like a communist there, William.
Yeah.
What's going on?
I know. It's
Anyway,
it's one of those odd ones, but the economy is it's completely screwed at the moment, I'm afraid.
Is the economy stupid?
Yes, well, that's exactly what some people have said
I have
online
to say-
so far, including Robert Taylor and Chris Brown. They say it's the economy that's going to be the most important thing. Lily, if it is the economy, what can Labour do to actually make it their issue?
I think we need to have more focuses excuse me, on actually changing the economy, because I think the coalition has made some improvements lately in terms of growth, in terms of jobs, but quite frankly isn't good enough. We need to change the economy so we have more support for small businesses, where we have jobs with higher wages, higher living standards, dealing with climate change, gradually reducing the deficit. So I think overall with the economy, I don't think Labour's making a big enough message. They focus too much on deficit. The Tories' austerity plans are horrible. Ours is really nice and lovely. They're not making the message enough about completely changing the economy in terms of actually working for working class people.
Thank you, Harry.
I agree that it's the economy, but I think that in fact, I don't think it's for the first time. I think that the phrase "it's the economy stupid" is right. But I think for so many elections, what I'm going to call the microeconomy has been completely sort of in tow with the macroeconomy. So while the country's been growing, people's wages have been going up and their standard of living has been going up as well. I think this time, for the first time, we've had a microeconomy where it's sort of lagged while the headline statistics have grown. So I think there are still a lot of people who feel as if their personal situation hasn't got much better, even though growth is going up and even though inflation is down. I think there are a lot of people who don't feel it in their pockets yet. And so I think it's going to be decided on that personal economic scale, on whether people themselves feel better off. And I have a feeling that they don't, and I have a feeling that that's why there's been no sort of big gap that the Tories have pulled ahead over Labour.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, I have to agree with Harry there with the personal economy thing though, because it will have to kick in soon enough, and obviously that would have correlated with the votes. But it's also how the parties. Maybe David Cameron is just best of the bad bunch, perhaps, and in terms of leadership, and a Blair or a Thatcher or even a Major. Yeah, I also like to touch on what the Labour. The message is so dire and so surrounded by an obsession with 0 hours contracts, which is in terms of employment. The figures are in favour of the Conservatives. They are the ones with the clear and direct message, although a long-term economic plan is absolutely dull.
First spoken hashtag of the night. Well done.
Yes. I had to put it right in there, didn't I? Yeah, I absolutely find that hashtag dull. Yeah.
Well, Chris G would agree with you on that one. He says Labour's first party political broadcast featured a millionaire hobbit telling people how to vote, rather than Ed Miliband. Ed and Ed have lost it for Labour, says Chris. Leon French says he generally doesn't believe there will be one main issue. It's going to depend on many factors. Henry here, Captain Facetious, Captain_Facetious. Monster Raving Looney Party is going to be the big winner. You can see where you get the name from. Anyone else want to say something on this one? Jack?
Yeah, one other thing about 0 hours is just how hypocritical Labour have been, with some stats with Labour people employing people on 0 hours themselves. So,
They don't employ them.
Lily, please explain that.
The ONS said that no Labour MPs actually employ 0 hour contracts. That's not true.
But they do have contracts that don't guarantee them any hours, don't they?
Who, Labour MPs?
Yeah, they've issued contracts from IPSA that don't guarantee some of their employees any actual hours, which is essentially a 0 hours contract, isn't it?
Well, according to the ONS, apparently no Labour MPs employ 0 hour contracts. So that's apparently not true.
According to IPSA, who issue the contracts, they do.
The only reason they're not called 0 hour contract by the ONS is because they're called a different term. They're called like reserve workers by IPSA, but in actual fact that is a 0 hours contract. I don't think that point is neither. I think that point is neither here nor there though.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you each now a couple more points here, and then I'm going to ask each of you to give us to close the show, your prediction for the overall balance of the election. But the final points people have made here. Chris G says that Clegg says there was no link between the issue of boundary reform and electoral reform, boundary reform and reform of the House of Lords for entirely understandable reasons, but unfortunately the Lib Dems were the biggest losers. The Lib Dems were the biggest losers under the proposed boundary reforms. Salman Anwar says he agrees with you, Harry, completely explains why there's no Tory lead. He'd also say people might not feel it, but may be hopeful. Stradihuvius, I think how the economy will interact with short-term living standards may be big. I suspect deficit alone doesn't mean much to many. So, come on then, tell me. What is your prediction for what's going to happen in this general election? What are we all going to wake up to or stumble around in the early afternoon on Friday, the 8th of May, to find? I'll come to you first, Joe.
It's probably more likely to be a minority Conservative government, I feel. But who knows what's going to happen? That's the thing. It's a strange one this year. That's all I can really say. It's bizarre.
Thank you. Harry, what do you think the outcome is going to be?
Conservative, Liberal Democrat coalition. I think Conservatives will get 300-ish. Labour will get 280-ish. Liberal Democrats 30-ish, and then the rest as we've discussed. I think it will be close though. I just think when it comes down to it, I don't think the SNP plus Labour will have enough seats just to get in. I think Caroline Lucas will keep her seat. George Galloway, I think, may lose in Bradford. I think the DUP will go up to 9 seats because they've got this agreement with the UUP. And I really hope that we don't do anything with the DUP. Really hope. They're worse than UKIP.
Thank you. Jack.
I'm hoping for a sort of Conservative Lib Dem UKIP pact, all sort of join together. But I think, unfortunately, it would be a Labour SNP government in the end, because I think the SNP will win quite a large amount of seats in Scotland. I think they'll just tip it over the edge, and they'll block Conservative government.
Thank you very much. Lily, what's the outcome of the election going to be?
I think, interestingly, this election could be very much like 1992, because in 1992 the opinion polls in the last couple of days, they didn't really matter. So I think overall it could go on either side. It just depends on the turnout, who actually decides to vote. My prediction would be, I think Labour will just have enough seats with the SNP and hopefully Liberal Democrats to just go over the line. I don't think the Conservatives will hold 300 seats. I think they can be in the range of 280. So I think it's going to be very, very close. You could actually even have a situation where the Tories get more votes, but Labour gets more seats. So I think Labour will just have enough seats. I think Labour will just have a couple more seats than the Conservatives to just gain Downing Street, essentially.
Thank you very much. And William?
I agree that the election is probably going to be very similar to the 1982 one, but I think it's going to be similar to Majors in that in the last few days it swings Conservative. I don't think there's going to be quite a majority. I reckon there's going to be 1 or 2 seats short, and I reckon we'll probably ask the Lib Dems first to join the coalition, and I reckon there's going to be some infighting towards the end of the election between the SNP and Labour, where their differences come to the fore.
Thank you very much indeed. I see a cat has joined us, which is always welcome here on Spectral Debates.
No comment about cats.
Now, next week, thank you all very much indeed. Let me begin by, first of all, by thanking our panellists who've joined us tonight. Thank you very much, Harry and Jack and Joe and Lily and William. Thank you all for joining us and tweeting us from home or indeed wherever you are tonight. We're very grateful. Next week's show, there is a bit of a surprise. I'm not presenting next week. You have another person presenting, and that person is going to be David Jeffrey. I am elsewhere and have no guaranteed access to the internet, so I hope to be able to watch if I can. We have already a Conservative guest for next week, but if you'd like to join the panel next week from any other point of view, do get in touch for SD21. Don't forget, the week after that, on the 19th, we have our alternative election debate. I'm hoping to get all 7 parties that appeared in the debate the other day on here. Currently, I think we are still looking for Plaid Cymru, Green and UKIP. So if you would like to come on and do, for the first Spectrum time, the more partisan side of things, do get in touch and let us know. If you want to write for us, send it in, let us know. It's great. We'd welcome you doing whatever you'd like to do there. Until then, enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Have a very happy Easter. I hope you enjoyed Passover and anything else you might be celebrating at this time. Good night.